So I read about the creepiest things people have ever done, but it got me thinking, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Story 1. I've got two. When I was young, my mom took me to her doctor's appointment. When she was at the desk paying, I was sitting in a chair in the waiting room. This old man with a huge beard was sitting next to me, and he slowly put his hand across his armrest and onto mine, with his fingers slightly over my armrest and almost hitting my leg. He slowly jerked his fingers, signaling he wanted to hold my hand. He had a smile on his face, and honestly, being that age, he reminded me of my grandfather. I thought all old people were loving grandparents who love children, so I held his hand. He was slowly trying to get closer to me. I didn't really feel this was wrong, but I did start to feel a little awkward after a minute of holding his hand. Finally, my mom turned around after paying, saw this, and flipped on the guy. She started screaming at him, telling him he's a sick man and should be in jail, and told the secretary to call the police. Now, I don't know if they did. Most likely they did, but I don't remember. But I forgot about it until recently. If my mom wasn't there or this guy was more aggressive and fast-paced, I probably would have been violated and harmed. For my second story, there was this girl in high school who was absolutely obsessed with me. I started to feel creeped out around her and could never figure out why. At this time, I just knew she had an overly huge crush on me, but that was it. Anyway, she invited me over to her house to hook up. After that, her dad calls her and tells her he'll be home in an hour. She immediately gets up and says, "I have to take a shower." So she goes and takes a shower. I go on her computer to kill some time while she's washing up, and no lie, I open a folder and see all the Photoshop pictures of me holding her and all of that. It was kind of funny and pathetic at first, but then I saw she had about 60 Photoshop photos of me, and some of them were disturbing. I started to feel like I needed to run. It started feeling like I was in a horror movie in one of the scenes where the victim realizes he's in the house where he'll meet his end. Out of curiosity, I tried to look for more and saw a letter she wrote to me saved in the same folder, telling her she'd end me before she saw me with anybody else, that she'd do anything to get pregnant by me and all that. I never felt creeped out in my life until that time. Story 2. When I was young, I was once sitting in my parents' car in a Kmart parking lot. Being my inquisitive self, I'd look around the lot at other cars and their goings and comings. Soon enough, a red pickup truck pulled up beside me with a quite disheveled-looking man sitting behind the wheel. I just stared at him because he had a look of great sadness within his eyes. He stared blankly at the dash for a while. After some time, he just started yelling and then broke down into tears. Immediately after breaking into tears, he reached into the glove department and pulled out a weapon. He checks the magazine, points it into the roof of his mouth, and starts screaming names. He did that for a few more minutes until he realized a boy was staring lockjawed at him. He just stared at me with a weapon in his lap, smiled, and blew me a kiss. He left some time after the staring contest. My dad came back from the store and asked why I looked so pale. I didn't say a word until we got home, and I immediately vomited into the toilet, feeling so nervous about the entire thing. To this day, I don't understand why he blew me a kiss. Maybe it was out of nervousness and he wanted to look unthreatening, or maybe he had a habit of doing it to make him feel alive. Those weren't crocodile tears, though. I wonder if that man went through with it. I really hope he didn't. Story 3. My first year in college, I started dating this ridiculously beautiful girl in my program. I had kind of stolen her from another guy also in the program, but didn't think too much of it at first. They had been only casually dating. A mutual friend of ours told me that this guy is very angry at me and plans to kick my behind and blah, 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 blah. Nothing happens, and I forget about the whole thing. A few weeks later, she calls me very distraught and tells me that while she was out, someone had broken into her place and stolen only a few pairs of her underwear. The thief had climbed in through her second-story window, very challenging feat to say the least, and the strangest thing was that she lived with two other fantastic-looking women from whom nothing was stolen. The thief even left the house without grabbing one of the many laptops, cameras, and other valuables lying around the house. Needless to say, she was very upset and stayed with me for about a week. The landlord had bars installed on the windows and the police got involved, and a sketch of the perp was even made from some stuff the neighbors had seen. Then a few weeks later, just around the time we had sort of forgotten about the whole fiasco, it happened again, only this time the guy had pried off the bars of the window and done exactly the same thing, taking a few pieces of her underwear and some bras and nothing else. At this point, she doesn't know what to do. The cops are no closer to finding out who was doing this, so she pretty much moves into my place for security. After some time, things settled down and we moved on. She started to feel safe again and we never heard from the thief again. Eventually, we broke up, became friends, I graduated, and yada 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 yada. Now, fast forward 1 year, a good friend of mine, who is a girl who has no relation at all to and has never even met the girl mentioned above, confesses to me that when she was young, she was by a family friend and their 3 sons. This is obviously very hard on her, and I'm the first person she has ever told, etc. Well, it turns out that one of the sons who had done that is the same dude who I snaked the girl from back in college. So instantly my mind started piecing together the portrait of a deranged, sniffing kitty fiddler ex-lover out for my blood and my ex-girlfriend's underpants. I've never told anyone the connection between these two separate events and have no idea what to do about it. I'm sworn to secrecy with both girls about this info as it's pretty serious stuff. That guy still walks around us. I see him every once in a while, but I have no idea what to say or do as I have no proof. Story 4. While in college, I came back to my apartment one afternoon to find some girl I didn't know in my living room. This wasn't all that unusual, as my roommates often had visitors at all hours, and she said she knew at least one of them. After some casual banter, she announced she needed to go grocery shopping, and she offered to cook me dinner if I went with her and helped her out. She was kind of cute, so I decided to walk with her and see what happened. At the supermarket, she asked me what I wanted to eat and then invited me to her place where she cooked a meal for us. After dinner, we had a little bit of fun through the night into the wee hours. Taking a break, we talked about random stuff. One of the things we talked about was a local guy our age who had apparently ended his parents and disappeared. The guy's whereabouts were at that time still unknown, and there was a massive police hunt going on to locate him. Well, at one point, the girl said, "I don't think he did it." She sounded so sure of this that I asked why she thought that when all the news stories strongly suggested his guilt. To my shock, she said, "Because he was my boyfriend." I realized then that I was in the bed of the girlfriend of a criminal at large. I didn't sleep the rest of the night for fear that someone was going to jump out of a closet and harm me. The next morning, I politely excused myself and racked my brain the entire way back to my place about how and if I should distance myself from this person. On the one hand, she was attractive, cooked a nice meal, and seemed to want to have a good time with me, a big plus. On the other hand, she might have a jealous boyfriend who likes to hurt people. The if part was answered when I got to my apartment to find my roommates all gathered in the living room. They'd been wondering where I'd been, and it turns out some girl had seen me on the street and followed me home a day or so before, then came back, more or less invited herself in. The girl they were talking about was the girl with whom I had spent the night. So the girlfriend of a criminal at large had stalked me and me. She confirmed this a couple of days later when I finally worked up the nerve to talk to her again for the last time. The ex was found some weeks later. He had indeed ended his family and a couple more people along the way before he was captured. Story 5. When I was young, I went to a flea market in South Carolina. It was the last day the flea market was open before closing down for the season. So I came across a man in a booth selling all sorts of bladed instruments. Behind him, on a rack, was a katana. He sold it to me for $20. Now, what was I going to do with a katana? Nothing. I kept it for years, though. It stayed either in a closet or under my bed for those years. I went to college, and it followed. Again, never being closer to the front of my mind than when moving and thinking, "Oh, there's my sword. I forgot it was there." So fast forward to August 18th, 2006. I'm now living by myself in Charleston on the ground floor of a one-bedroom apartment. My katana is under my bed. I have a sliding glass door with vertical blinds, a screened-in patio, and a hammock hung outside. And that night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to hear my blinds rattling. I think to myself, wow, it's pretty windy outside. But I quickly remember that I never sleep with the sliding glass door open and that someone is in my apartment. I'm lying in bed thinking of things that I can use as weapons to defend myself in my home. I've got nothing. I have a large mag light in the closet, but that meant I'd have to go up and get it. Then I realized something else. Under my bed was, oh yes, it was righteous. With my sword, I crept around the corner and looked into my living room to find 2 very large men stuffing my belongings into garbage bags. I can make them out with the light from my laptop waving around as they move around with it. When you're amped up on adrenaline, you say some dumb things. I yell, "You, stop!" They both turn and ran out the sliding glass door. When you're amped up on adrenaline, you also do some dumb things. The only thought that went through my mind was, those mofos have my stuff and I want them back. I chased them out of the door, through the wooded area behind my apartment, and into a marshy area behind that. All of this was in my underwear, no shoes, and with a big sword. Sadly, I lost track of them and sanity seeped back into my brain. I realized that they might have a weapon. I know they have a bladed weapon they use to cut the screen on my porch. I'm practically bare, carrying a very large blade, and the only people that know that I'm out here are me and them. I went back inside and called the police. The burglars had cut away my screen on the patio and, using the blade as a prying instrument, forced the lock on my sliding glass door open. For weeks, I made rounds to area pawn shops, but to no avail. None of my stuff was ever recovered, and I was uninsured. I lost my laptop, my DVDs, all of my video games, and my keys. Strangely, they didn't get my PS2. It wasn't really scary at the time. What is scary now was waking up to a bump in the night and not remembering if I locked the front door. Alright, so as a guy myself, I would have probably gone after those creeps too. Like, dude, my video games are my treasure. No one messes with them. What about you? What's something you'd fight creeps off of? Drop your story in the comments below. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more creepy stories. Story 6. When I was young, I had to do a work and study program for a charity that dealt with mentally handicapped people in their 20s and 30s. I worked with a 34-year-old man named Ryan. I spent 3 weeks training him to do simple person-to-person interactions so he could be a Walmart greeter or something. I came home after a session to find police at my house as well as ambulances in the driveway. The cops told me my mother was fine, but she had been attacked and cut on her right arm. It turns out that the police were called when Ryan couldn't be contacted. It turns out he had been having some fun to pictures of me. He wanted my picture to show his mom or something. And he had become obsessed to the point where he walked into my house when I was gone with a bladed weapon, probably to me. The most messed up part of the story is that while he was obviously mentally disabled, it turns out that he wasn't mentally but rather posing as one to meet high school boys. Story 7. When I was young, I started working at McDonald's. One night I was working until 10 p.m. when one of my co-workers got off at 7 and was waiting in the car. Around 10, I started my car and was waiting for it to defrost. So this guy gets out of his car that he's been waiting in and says, "Forget something?" and then starts scraping the ice off my windows. When he finishes, I mumble, "Thanks." Then he just stares at me. He looks like he wants to say something, but I just get in the car and head home. He followed, which I didn't freak out about because he lives on the same highway I do. Whatever. I pulled into my driveway. So does he. What the hell? I decided to run into the house. "Hey, Kerlaska, wait, stop." I stopped. He grabs both my elbows, pushes me against the car, and says, "Will you go to the prom with me?" I say, "No." He refused to let me leave until I said yes. I decide to accept his invitation and then call him tomorrow and cancel when he's not freaking me out. I didn't cancel. We started dating, and now we're happily married. It's still a creepy way to ask someone out, but now it's a cute how we met story. Story 8. My girlfriend is a sleepwalker. It only really comes on when she's incredibly exhausted or stressed out. We had just come back from Tokyo. It was our first night back in bed. I get up to take a whiz, and when I turn around, she's standing in the door, eyes semi-open but glazed over, face slack. She surprised me, but I thought she just needed to use the bathroom. But she just stood there and wouldn't let me pass until I spoke to her. "Hey, we have to get out of here. They're coming for us." The hairs on my neck immediately stood up. The way she said it was so cold and mechanical. It was like it wasn't even her voice. That's when I realized she was sleepwalking. "Go back to bed." "Okay." And she spun around and shuffled off to bed. I know it doesn't sound like much, but it was so creepy. It's like she was possessed. I didn't even get back in bed with her. I went into the living room and slept on the couch. This dude slept on the couch? I would have run out and crashed at one of my buddies' couches. That was creepy. Story 9. A few years ago, a show ran called Crime Investigation Australia, which was a surprisingly well-made series about famous Australian offenders and the process of bringing them to justice. I got really into it, spent a lot of time ruminating about how horrible it would be to be harmed, knowing you were powerless to stop it because they had tied you up or something. Well, cut to me waking up in a daze, completely disoriented and with no idea where I was. I looked around and I'm in a blank white box with no doors or windows. Sound starts to filter into my head and I realize I can hear a roaring car engine. The car takes a turn and I slam into the wall of the box. It hits me. Bing. I start pounding on the walls and screaming for help. After less than a minute, the car grinds to a halt and I hear footsteps moving along the side of the vehicle. A camouflage door opens and a policewoman is standing there with a stern look on her face. It turns out I blacked out at the end of the exam party and passed out on the sidewalk before I got home. Two lovely policewomen stuck me in a paddy wagon and spent the next hour driving me around trying to find my house. My ID still said I lived in a dorm, but I'd moved off some 6 months earlier and the RAs there had no idea of my new address. My quote-unquote was just me coming in the back of the paddy wagon. In the end, they got through to one of my friends on my phone, one of the few who weren't too hammered to say my address, and dropped me back at my place. Considering it would have saved them masses of time and hassle just to throw me in the drunk tank overnight, I was hugely grateful and sent their station a very sincere thank you letter. Story 10. My old bedroom faces the door at the top of our stairs and into my parents' bedroom. So one night, my mom was at work and my dad was visiting my grandmother. I was in my room listening to Backstreet Boys or something, and I heard someone coming up the stairs. We don't lock our doors in our neighborhood. When I looked, it was my dad in his usual pajamas. I said goodnight, but he never looked at me. He just went into the bedroom and that was it. I went back to whatever I was doing. Half an hour later, I heard someone else coming up the stairs, and when I looked, it was my dad, fully clothed, wearing his jacket. He asked me how my night went. I just went pale. To this day, we cannot figure out what happened. He checked the house, and no one was there, but our house had been known for being haunted. You believe in that? We've had several people leave our house because it just didn't feel right, and some out-of-ordinary things have happened that could only be explained with far-fetched reasoning. I never stayed in my house by myself after that. Story 11. On my first day, having just moved to a new town, I was out riding my bike all over for hours. I noticed this truck passed me very slowly several times at all different points along my completely random biking route. The vehicle was obviously stalking me. The driver would be going the speed limit and go very slowly past me, then continue and do a U-turn when he got just out of sight and repeat it again and again. Now, I was pretty concerned once I noticed him for like the fourth time just creeping by me, even though there was nothing to see anywhere near me except open grassy fields of nothingness. So I made a mad dash for home. He passes me again and again on a couple more streets, starts making more speedy and noticeable moves and U-turns in my path. I got a little ahead of him and out of sight around a corner. As he was coming towards me, I dove into a ditch. I don't think he saw me. He continued on without slowing down. I was only a few houses from home, so I launched down the street, threw my bike into the garage, and ran inside. Out my window, I could still see his vehicle pace back and forth a couple of times before disappearing, never to be seen again. Good thing this kid had his wits about him and escaped that. That was really spine-chilling. Story 12. My friend and I were downtown one day and decided to eat lunch at a food court in some old mall. Most of the places were closed down except for Subway and a non-chain pizza place. We each ordered a slice of pepperoni and a fountain drink from the man behind the counter. The first thing that was weird was that he wasn't wearing a uniform, just plain clothes. The second thing that was off was that he charged us both two completely different prices despite the fact that we each ordered the same thing. What we each paid was less than the listed price for our items on the menu too. My friend and I laughed about it, ate our food, and went on with our day. Half an hour later, we both sat down in a hotel lobby and we each ended up falling asleep at roughly the same time and waking up a good hour later. We're both freaked out that we would each fall asleep for no reason, and we both noticed that we felt pretty awful. A few hours later, we decided to get dinner at the Subway at the food court. As we entered, we noticed that there were two new, freaked out looking people working at the pizza place. They are both wearing uniforms. At the other exit of the food court, on the opposite side, we see paramedics taking a gurney to an ambulance. Strapped to the gurney is the man who served us our pizza. The janitor was mopping up some kind of mess in front of the pizza place. We both had no clue what had happened and were too weirded out to even want to know or ask the people at the pizza place what the hell had happened. Story 13. I broke up with the girl and told her no. I still don't want to be friends with her, talk to her, or anything. And then 2 months later, she burned her house down so that I would talk to her again. She came up to me in school and told me that she did it because she missed me and wanted me back. I made an anonymous tip to the police. They put her under a 72-hour watch, but they couldn't keep her longer than that or find enough evidence to charge her with arson. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy Waiters. What seriously up things have you overheard? Story 4 is so wild. I'll see you in that video, and thank you for watching this one.